Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I just have a couple one announcement actually, and then I'm gonna give a brief introduction to our speaker tonight. So next week, are we good on Zoom too, Theron? Okay. Next week on Monday, we have a pickleball. Are we doing a tournament or is it
Yeah, we
just? Okay,
Darren, you should actually.
Bracket. We'll get a bracket.
okay.
Yeah.
We got a bracket for you guys on Zoom that couldn't hear that. That's from 7 to 10 p.m. So make sure you come. We've reserved the whole facility, so it's going to be fun. But in way of an introduction, I'm super stoked to have my mission president here, Bret Clayton. He has been super successful throughout his life, and he's an amazing man, and I've looked up to him a ton. But he graduated from the University of Utah in accounting. So all you BYU guys,
We'll forgive him.
yeah. Please listen to him still.
He's wearing blue though.
I am. We've been a bit embarrassed this year.
He's wearing the right color.
But he's held a lot of really cool leadership positions too in like a lot of global companies. So Rio Tinto is one of them. And if you don't know Rio Tinto, it's a global mining company for like precious metals and minerals. So if you ever did like a field trip in elementary school at Kennecott Copper Mines, Rio Tinto owns Kennecott. So it's pretty cool. He's the father of 3. How many grandchildren do you have?
3.
Okay, 3 grandchildren.
Just starting.
Awesome. And then, yeah, he was my mission president. So let's give a warm welcome to Bret.
All right, so my wife Lisa's here with me as well. It's good to be here. Take about 20-25 minutes, be available for Q&A if you have any questions afterwards. Yeah, I worked for PricewaterhouseCoopers right out of college down in Phoenix for 9 years. And then after that, I went to work for Rio Tinto, moved back to Salt Lake. And then we moved to London for 4 years. I was only there 13 months. And then we moved to London for 4 years, moved to Australia for 3, moved to Wyoming for 4, and then we moved back to London for another 6, which is where Rio Tinto is headquartered. I started in finance, was a CFO for some of their subdivisions and divisions, and then I became a CEO for their coal operations in the US. That's what I was doing in Wyoming, and then I ran their global copper and diamond business, in addition to some administrative like their services and things like that. So that gives a little bit of background as well. So I was going to talk a little bit about what I think, maybe some things that I think I learned from hard work. And I like to start by my father instilled in us. I have 6 brothers. My parents never made, I never felt poor, but I had 2 pair of shoes, one for Sunday and one for the rest of the week, 2 pair of pants, but I never felt poor. But he instilled in us, and they instilled in us work ethic, which has paid off. If you look at throughout my family and my brothers and now nieces and nephews and throughout, I grew up mowing lawns, shoveling walks for $1.25. Now I have a heated walk, thank goodness. So I don't have to worry about real green. But I started my first job at 15 at Dan's Foods. Probably don't even know what that is, bag of groceries, $1.90 an hour. So I'd work a whole Saturday and make just over 15 bucks. And I thought it was really cool when I got my first raise is a nickel an hour more. So I'd work a whole Saturday and make an extra 40 cents. But you learn a lot from that. And one of the things you learn is the value of work and what it takes to get something and the value of $1 and making choices. I mean, if you want designer, once we started working like that, my parents, we were required to we bought our own clothes. So I had a few more pair of pants then and stuff. But I could make choices about what I did. And if I wanted something a little nicer, I could do that, but I had to sacrifice, maybe not, I wouldn't have Levi's, maybe I'd get a designer brand. But those are the choices that they make. And we saw that with our kids when we were in England. Lisa, I remember I was traveling a lot the first time it was the second time we moved there, and our kids were constantly asking, oh, we need this, we need a pair of this, we need new shoes. You know, it's 90 pounds, 100 pounds each pop. And we thought, you know, we gotta, because they couldn't really work. It's not an environment where they could work themselves, not conducive to that. And so we decided to give them a pretty hefty allowance. Lisa came up with this idea, and we'd put their allowance on a card every month, a debit card. And then they had to buy their own clothes. They had to pay for their own when they went out to the movies or when they went out to eat. And it was interesting to see each of the children learn and prioritize at least that point in their life what it was that they wanted. And if they wanted something that was more expensive, they could save up for a few months and forego some other things. And I think that's just a really important lesson that I learned early in my life from working. And an example, I love to golf. I'm a big golfer. And back then, when I was 15, 16, 17, you could walk 9 holes at Bonneville for $1.25. And so, you know, I could work for a Saturday, make just $15, and I could play 9 holes, and that took 2.5 hours. That was a pretty good trade-off in my view. Now, going to the prom, that was like 3 Saturdays. So, you know, that had to really, you know, I really had to feel like that's somebody I want to go on a date with. So, but learning those trade-offs early in your life and learning the value of a dollar and how to save it and spend it and reward yourself as well, but how to save it. I've seen it's just been very important. And when I started at PwC, I learned that as well. Just out of college, kind of in a more of a consulting environment, you're not as in control of your life and your schedule as you may want to be. I worked 400 or 500 hours of overtime. That's kind of a law firm type environment, consulting environment. And as you become more experienced and senior, you tend to have more control over your own schedule and can schedule a lot of that more. And so you learn the value of time as well, not only money, but your time. One of the things that I learned is that when I work, I work. Not that I was boring or I just, you know, I was a team player and everything, but I worked. I had some friends at PwC, they goofed off a lot and they didn't get their work done. So what did they have to do? They had to work more hours because I wasn't afraid of working, but I wanted to get home too because I like to have fun. And so I like to think that when I worked hard and I was focused. I was a team player, but when I went home, I wanted to have fun doing things that I wanted to do at home. And I think that was an invaluable lesson. I think that you can also learn as part of this process. So not only the value of money and the trade-offs, but the value of time and what you like. One of the things I'll try and come back to a little later is, you know, there's nothing wrong with success at all. I encourage it completely. You have goals and objectives in your life. Not everything's about money. And a lot, you know, you might have heard the saying that money doesn't buy happiness. I like to always say the lack of money doesn't buy it either. And so, you know, people that have that as their sole focus, you know, I like to think of balance. And I wanted to do certain things in my life and have certain things, not necessarily that I had to be super rich or anything like that. But I like to play golf. I have a membership in a country club. I'm able to enjoy those sorts of things that I wouldn't have been otherwise. And those are the trade-offs that you make. And so you need to find something that you like as well. And that's how you become successful. If you work hard and you enjoy it. If you have to do something you hate, you don't want to get up every day and do it. Early in my life, I mean, I can't say I got up and went to work every day, tickled pink that I was going to work that day, or that I had this thing that I was working on that day. But I liked my jobs and I liked what I did and I gravitated towards what I did. One of the things that I learned from PricewaterhouseCoopers is we had different clients. So I got to see different corporate cultures. More dictatorial, more teamwork, more, you know, just very different companies and how they operate. So I got a feel for what I liked and what I felt comfortable doing. And also industries. I love to learn, you know, one of my clients was in grocery stores, one of them was in mining. That's kind of how I got interested into that. One of them did contacts. I learned how different businesses worked and how, what made them run, and what, some was more operating costs, some were more marketing focused, but what was I interested in? And that was an important lesson that I learned through that. So I always used to talk, and I'll bring this up. I used to bring up a missionary when they were going home at the end, and I would ask them, I'd pick somebody like Carter, who's a good missionary, like what he did. And I'd ask him, now, do you want to do this 20 times over, nonstop? And inevitably the answer was, not really. And I'd say, that's a career. And so if you're going to do that, it's best if you do something you love. And that trade-off, I have a brother who's a teacher, and somebody talked to him and said, you know, you're not going to make a ton of money as a teacher, but he loved teaching. And he worked it and managed his money. He probably has more money than most of the brothers because he was wise and he loved what he was doing. So I'm not saying you have to go do something that's going to just, you know, pay you oodles of money. Do something you love and that you find enjoyment. And that is what will help bring success into your life. Not only happiness, but success financially and in your objectives that way as well. When you work with people, I was going to say, be a mentor and be mentored. You know, as when you come into a company, a supervisor, I don't want to use the word boss, a manager, supervisor is maybe a little better. Typically more experienced, especially like in the mining industry, people that have been around, you've been through cycles, you know, excess demand, excess supply, how these cycles work. You've seen a lot, and that experience comes. And so as a new person, a supervisor shouldn't ignore you, but at the same time, you need to give respect to people as well that have more experience. And I had, when I became a CEO, moving from financial, being a CFO, chief financial officer, to running a company, I came from a finance background, accounting. I was not an engineer in an engineering driven company. And so I had to find my feet in doing that. And there was an individual that I really got to like, and we got to be friends. He was an engineer, very knowledgeable, didn't play politics. His advice was always good. He was worried about what was best for the company, not best for him or his department or this mine or that mine. But when he came to me initially with problems, no solutions. And so one day I kind of pulled him aside and said, Jeff, you know, I really appreciate that you feel comfortable coming and talking to me, because as you move up in the ladder and in positions, that's one of the hardest things, is people don't talk to you, won't tell you the truth. They tell you what you want to hear, not what you need to hear. But I said, Jeff, I'd like to hear, what are the solutions? What are the choices? What are the 2 or 3 choices? And why is this one better than that one? Or what are the problems with this one compared to that one? And you know what? He started doing that. And we formed a great team. And you need to find people like that offset your weaknesses at work, because you're not going to be able to do everything. Very few people can. And so we work as teams. And so respecting people and helping to coach them, be mentored, and mentor other people. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was in being mentored. One of the things that I did is I wasn't afraid, without being a pest, to talk at appropriate times during, you know, your semi-annual review or something. So how am I doing? Feedback. What do you think my long-term potential is? And how is that lining up with how I see my potential and how I'm doing? And I always would tell people, if those are out of alignment, now you got to decide if that's a company view or if that's some kind of, it can be a personal view of a manager. And if it's a company view, then you got to really think about, so am I missing some things that I need to develop, and how do I develop them? Or am I just not the right fit either for this job or for this company? And, you know, I had people that mentored me and coached me. And one example, when I was a CFO and I thought, you know, each step I kind of thought broadened my view as to what I thought I might be able to do. And so I talked to my boss or my manager once removed. We'd have those conversations once a year. And I asked him, I said, you know, do I need to get some more operating experience at a lower level? Do I need to take a step back for 18 months or 2 years in my career to get that experience? And he mentored me. He helped me. He said, no, I think you've got the skill base, and help me get into a role. But you have to be able to have those honest conversations about your future, and you need to take that feedback. And as a manager, you need to be able to give that feedback. And that's one of the hardest things you'll do as a manager, especially when the feedback maybe isn't what the person wants to hear. But if you help them earlier on, coach them, sometimes it might be going to some extra training or being involved in a project so that you get some additional skills that you don't have. If you're willing to learn, I was always willing to help somebody. And if it just wasn't going to work out, always help that person land well somewhere else, maybe in the company that was a better fit for them. And usually they ended up being happier themselves. But you need to take charge of your own career in that sense without being a pest. Like, oh, I want to be promoted in 12 months. I got to be here. I want to be the CEO when I'm 28. You know, that stuff probably not going to happen unless you've done your own company. But those are the sorts of things you need to do. And also on the other side, as a manager, you need to do that for people. And one of the hardest things that I think you learn throughout a career as you move up, and the more that you do is through people. You know, initially, if I would write the memo, I would do the analysis, I would come up with the conclusion, I would go home and feel like I did something that day because I could actually point to it. As you move up and take broader responsibilities, and I don't mean this badly by saying that you use people, but you get work done through people, by managing people. And that's a really hard click to make in your career, is when you start, because you can't point at what you did. I mean, I used to tell people later in my career, I don't do any work. And they'd laugh, but you know, I meet with people, I view projects, I see how things are progressing. I try and make corrections, I have to make decisions, I have to understand issues, but I'm not doing original work myself. And that's a really hard thing to develop. And one of the hardest, it's great when people do a great job and they're doing well and the team's doing well, and you can address that and work with them and provide opportunities for them. I used to love to see people get promoted and do really well. When people aren't working out, it's better to address it sooner rather than later. And it can be training, additional experience in an area, just maybe some coaching. And sometimes they're just not the right fit for that role. And 99% of the time I found they knew it and they weren't happy themselves. But as a manager, you are a supervisor, you can't afford to have poor performers, but particularly the more senior you become, you just don't have the time for it. And everybody in the team knows it. And so when you don't address it, you bring down team morale, and it just has a real negative effect. And it is the hardest thing to do because you care about people and you want to make sure that you're trying to help people. It's not about, you know, managing through fear or dictatorial. You can do that. Good luck over the long term for most people. Unless you're an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs, you know, probably not going to happen over the long term. So working and learning to be a team player and be mentored, but also to help others in their own success is very important. The last thing I was going to talk about is do it right, do it ethically. I don't know how many people know Warren Buffett. He's just like the sage of Omaha, he's called. He just has so much wise advice. To show you how old he is and I am, you know, he'd say, if you can't read about it in tomorrow morning's paper on the front, on the front page, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And nowadays you'd say, if you don't want to see it on TikTok in 5 minutes, it's probably something you shouldn't be doing. And he would say, it takes a lifetime to earn a reputation. It takes minutes to lose it. And it's so true. Talking about, he's a big investor, the most successful. You don't know who's swimming without their swimming trunks on until the water goes out. And then you know who's not doesn't have their swimming trunks on, is one of his saying. And, so do it right, treat people well. And at the end of the day, it might not always work out exactly like you would hope, but in the long term, that will benefit you as a person, as a manager, and the company. And just finish on that, the importance of working as a team and with people, coaching and mentoring, both ways is so important. And as you do that, my greatest achievements, or I hate to say that because it's their work, but I feel like I helped some people move, identified some skills, got them into roles where they could shine, and they ultimately ended up doing better than me in the company. I didn't have a problem with that because they deserved it. And it was great to see it. I took a great deal of satisfaction in that, as people that had worked for me later worked at the same level, me on the executive committee of Rio Tinto, and it was fantastic. And I think if you take some of those things, hard work, not being afraid of success, coaching, being coachable, but also helping others along the way, being aware of what you want out of life and how you're doing, and taking feedback, and then deciding if this is right for you, because sometimes it's not, and you need to make that decision that maybe I fit someplace better, and you'll be more successful. Because I'll finish it. If you have to do something you hate and have to get up every day and do it, I can't think of anything more miserable than that. My start at PwC, I worked my butt off. There were some clients I didn't like, some places I had to go. We're in Arizona. I don't know if anybody's from Arizona. That's not the greatest place in the world. Mining town. That's early in your career. And, you pay your dues along the way. I wasn't destroying myself nor my family. I was earning my stripes and my experience. And at the end of the day, it paid off. And I think those are some things that I've learned through my career that I think hopefully will be helpful to you. Well,
Yeah, that's awesome. I think we want to do like a little Q&A now, if you're okay with that.
yeah.
Maybe for 10-15 minutes. Why don't you talk about like work-life balance with family and faith and stuff too? I think a lot of people, including myself, want to figure the equation out with that.
That's a decision I made early on in my career. And one of the things that I did is, when I mentioned earlier, is when I worked. And I tried to be efficient because I wanted to go home. And you just set expectations. And if you deliver and you're really good at what you do, you have a lot of leeway in a company. And I delivered. When I had a project, it got done well. We came to good conclusions. I ran the company, I'm not being braggadocious. I'm just being honest. We ran the company well. And we tried to do what was right. And when you do that, you have confines. I mean, I had to travel a lot in my last job. 2 weeks out of the month, I was traveling. I lived in London, but I'd go to South Africa. I'd be in Tokyo, or I'd be in, Singapore. But when I was home, and I always flew out on Sunday night late, and I got home Saturday morning early. So I was home all weekend, and I was involved with the family. And when I was home during the week, I was home. We did family things. Great thing about being with a British company is you get, we got 35 days of vacation, 7 weeks. I took them. I wasn't embarrassed to take them. And I'm not lazy, but I worked when I worked, and I had fun when I had fun. So I think that's really important. I was going to tell you you're going to bring about Tom. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to tell him about another good thing you did, but Brett always made sure too, that we picked a day, we did Monday home evening, out to dinner with the kids. And we would always do that because it wouldn't interfere with a Friday night date or anything. And he was very, very good about making sure he was home in time for dinner to go. And our kids still want that. They're in their 30s, but
And we had date night.
yeah.
I didn't, don't stop dating your spouse, just because you get married. And that's really, I learned that from my dad. I'll tell just a brief example. So the CEO of our company, he ended up not being successful. He is a workaholic, really had nothing other than work. You couldn't talk to him about what happened in the football on Saturday or Sunday. I mean, he wouldn't do anything but talk about work. And one day, a member of our board was what would effectively be like the NFL commissioner of the NFL commissioner. He was the Aussie Rules commissioner for Aussie Rules football. And he had the board and all the executive committee and sat basically in the commissioner's box there in Sydney. And what's the CEO doing the whole time? Now I'm going to call it a BlackBerry because that's what it was, if you know it, but on his phone. But he was doing email the whole time, sitting there in his box, watching a great sporting event. Can you imagine going with Roger Goodell to the NFL commissioner box and sitting there and doing that, not being able to engage with him? I mean, he's missing a piece of his life. He wasn't a full person in my perspective. And that's what makes people, can you get a few people that might be successful that are just like that? Yeah, but I think, over the broad generalization, you're not going to. I mean, even look at Musk. I mean, I think he does nothing but work, but PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX. I mean, the guy can talk about anything. He's fascinating to listen to. And so, yeah, he works, but he does all kinds of stuff. He's not just singular.
Yeah, I love that. Any other questions that you have for Bret?
I'm curious, what age did you start the debit cards with the kids? Like, was there like a kind of flat age where you started to give that a lot?
So our daughters were 15 and 13.
13 and 15, and the 5-year-old son didn't get one. And it was mostly based on Mom, I want this, I want that. And I was getting really tired of this overrun. And it was such a good way for them. At first, it seemed very generous. we didn't tell our friends how much we were giving our kids.
It was 300 pounds a month, $500, about $550 a month. But things are expensive too. When you go, I mean, gas was $9 a gallon, and so to go out and eat and do stuff. But they had to buy their own clothes and go out. And it was interesting. One of our daughters, our oldest daughter, liked Burberry. Wanted a Burberry coat, cost 1,500 pounds. Well, you can save up and buy it. Other one liked to squirrel away money. They're kind of the opposite now. but they learned to manage their money. And so 15 and 13 is when we started that. And I think that was the smartest thing we did.
Did you become passionate about mining like over time, or was that always something you were interested in?
Yeah. I love to see how businesses work and how things are made. That's what I was probably the most passionate about. And what I became the most passionate about is the company and the culture. And I also saw it deteriorate at the end, unfortunately, under a CEO that didn't have the best methodologies. He ruled a little bit more through fear. But I really liked the industry and the diversity and seeing how things are made and done. And then I got to know the company, and I just love the company. And this is going to sound really weird, but I love finance. I was good at it. I loved it. I'm not going to say I loved accounting. I never booked an entry or had to do anything like that. I never wanted to. But I love finance. Buffett, the guy I was talking about, he calls accounting the language of business. And I think largely that's true, understanding how businesses run, what their margins are, what are their pressure points, how critical is marketing, how much margins versus operating costs, all those sorts of things. I love learning. And so I got a chance because I was able to move into different types of roles to keep broadening that and learning more. And that's what I became most passionate about.
Just curious, like, about, speaking about leadership, what are some of the principles as a mission president that you would parallel with business leadership or vice versa? Like, what did you learn there that helped here?
Yeah, and you know, so, and you learn from each experience, and being a religious leader is not totally different, but a little different. Ethics. So if you call that, I don't like to call it obeying the rules. I like to call it ethics, doing the right things. I had a mission president that talked about, he never talked to his missionaries about being obedient. I went up to him after the meeting and said, he gave a lesson on this. I said, what did you talk about? And I really liked what he said. He said, I wanted them to talk about becoming the best person for themselves, and that would naturally flow, and what that best person was. And I really liked the way he said that. But I think, you know, that ethics and caring about people, I mean, you have to be accountable, and you have to be coachable, and you have to hold people accountable. And I think you have to do both of those in both those situations to get the best results. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I look back at my time as a mission president, I wonder, did I hold people accountable enough? And I'm not sure I did, because in a religious setting, you tend to want, I think you extend a little bit more mercy, forgiving, but I always wanted the best people in the roles leading. I didn't want to, somebody didn't get it because it was their last 3 months. That's not why you do something. You do it because they've earned it. And I'm big in diversity. I learned that living in England and Australia, and learning that different people come from different places in the economic scale. They have different ideas. They come from different places in the country, different countries. They just have different views. And if you're closed off and don't understand that as well, I think that's one of the things I really learned is hearing ideas. The other thing I would say that I used to always preach is it's okay to make mistakes. Don't make a habit of it, because if all you do is make mistakes, then that becomes a problem for me as a leader if you're working for me. But if you make mistakes, own up to them. Like if you've made a decision and it's not the right decision, don't go out there and try and tell your team or the company or whoever, whatever you're working in, oh, it's right, you know, and fess up to it, correct it, and move on. People will respect you. And I think that's true in those situations. I learned that true, just, you know. But once it is, I'm the decision maker at the end of the day. I'll listen to input, we'll have the discussion. As a leader, I have to make a decision. We leave this room, we go and implement it. My commitment to you is if we discover that's the wrong decision, I'll change it. But, you know, we're out there as a team working together, not backbiting.
I think it's really interesting to hear your perspective working internationally. I mean, there's kind of like two questions I'd like to ask. First is just how would you balance that with like family? Obviously, there's a little bit more leeway with traveling and seeing maybe family back here in the States. But what were some of the advantages of like living somewhere else for your family?
So one of the things, so the second time we moved to England, our kids were 15 and 13, our oldest. And then we have a son who was 6, 7. And that was tough on our girls. I mean, our oldest was just starting high school, and they struggled for the first night. I mean, that's just tough. When we moved to Atlanta to be a mission president, our son had to leave for his last year of high school. That was tough. And I understand it. I mean, if my dad had come home and seen you. But I had somebody ask me a question and it was very interesting. So we were living in London. We had just come from Wyoming. We'd been in Australia before that. They said, well, we have a house back in Salt Lake. I said, no, we don't. And she was the head of HR. She said, well, your kids need to feel like they have a home base. And we talked about that. So we went that winter, went home and we bought a home in Salt Lake, even though we're living in London long term. And the kids would come over, Lisa and the kids, and I could come over for about 3 weeks around Christmas because some of my business was here, so I could work for a week and then I took 2 weeks off. Lisa would come as school got out in the mid-June and would be here through the end of August. I'd take 2 weeks off during the summer and come over and be with them. And then I'd work from here, maybe traveling to California, some other things in the States nearby. And so, but it got them back connected with family and their cousins and my brothers and Lisa's family and my family. And that really helped settle things down. That was a big deal. And we were in a financial position where we could do that. And so that was a big help. Now, the other side of it is, like, my girls, the two oldest ones, I mean, all their friends were from Norway, Sweden, all over Europe. My son, when he started going to he started school there, his friends were
14 kids in the class. He had Agus from Iceland, Mauricio from Colombia, who did not speak English yet, and was in kindergarten learning English. And then he had Tom from Holland. And Andrew was a little curious about, where am I from, Mom? Because he was born in Australia, but he was an American.
Yeah, so you're like, where am I? What am I? She can't answer. Well, you're American, but you're born in Australia. You live in England now. You're 7. But they got to know. They don't see they don't see color. They don't see nationalities. They're really blind to a lot of that stuff because of the experience of just growing up with people from all over who had very different views. And from a faith perspective, none of them were members of the church. And so they had, I mean, one of our girls in high school, parents she was junior or senior in high school, boyfriend stayed overnight over during the weekends, so we kind of talked to our girls about that, but that's what they grew up with that and they had to learn and make choices. So both of those, it kind of gave them a view, much broader view. And also, I also learned that we needed to connect back with home and they needed to feel like they had a place and we're not just wanderers.
So, you knew that you were gonna be mission president in 2017, or when was it again?
October,
17.
You went golfing with Elder Anderson or something, and
Ballard in
Ballard.
July. That's when a friend of mine introduced him and kind of put in his bucket. He was his wife and President Ballard's wife were cousins. I remember it was the day after Labor Day, we got a call from Elder Renland's office, 8 a.m. I looked over the clock, 8 a.m., right? As soon as the clock turned. And it was his office and he said, I'd like to meet with you. And so we went down the next day, Tuesday. Well, it would have been Wednesday because he called us on Tuesday, the day after Labor Day. And, met with him and then he told us what it was potentially about. And we told him our concerns, which were the biggest concern was Andrew being a senior. And then at the end of October, Lisa and I were driving, just leaving the house to go to the temple, and the phone rang. It was Elder Iron's office, President Iron's office, and said we can meet with him this afternoon. He's got time this afternoon. We went in, told us that was late October. So then we did training through, they do some training from January through June, and then you go for a kind of a 4-day training down to the MPC, and then you go out in July. It's drinking from a fire. It's when I say this, it's the most rewarding thing I ever did. It's the hardest thing I ever did. It's drinking from a fire hose from day one. And you don't know what you're doing a lot of times. You're learning along the way.
What was that transition like? Cause weren't you pretty involved in like business still and in your career?
I had
Some-
stepped back and I served on a couple of boards and those had finished and we had enough time from the October to July to get everything settled. And so we were able to do that. So no, I had retired from work at that point, full-time work. And so we were able to sort through the board roles and all those things fell into place at the right time. And so we were free to do so and, you know, we were retired. I was 56 when we went out and I was retired and financially we could do it and time-wise we could do it. It was really hard on them.
Yeah.
But Andrew's 24 now. He went to UVU, while we were in Atlanta, he wanted to learn how to fly. And we had a private airport 15 minutes away from him. He got his pilot's license as a senior in high school. His last 4 months or so as senior in high school. The last 3 or 4 months of high school, you could you could arrange the planes on the internet. If you want to go out flying that night, he could rent the plane, go out flying that night, come back in, and he loved to fly. He came back, went to UVU. He's a full-time pilot with Breeze, doing great. He's based in Hartford, Connecticut, and loves it.
Yeah, any last questions? Maybe one more.
What do you do now? Do you just golf or?
So I hope it's okay if I talk a little bit about the faith as we talked about. In the summer, I do golf. I mean, and I golf 4 times a week.
Where are you a member?
Willow Creek.
Oh,
and
that's
at-
where I grew up.
Yeah,
My grandpa lives on Willow Creek.
and in Trotta down in St. George.
It's awesome.
And so, he's 85 years old. I still can't believe golf, but he's the guy that introduced me to Pleasant Valley, but we're best of friends and we play 4 times a week. And some people, I love it. And we spend in the summer, I mean, we make sure our house is the place spot to be for grandkids. We have a pool, we have and we enjoy
We
it.
have
The
an ice
kid-
cream machine.
We have an ice cream machine and they, and not one of those turn crank ones, but,
No,
and,
okay.
they want to be that. We spend a lot of time with kids, grandkids, we babysit. We take out, do stuff. I'm very involved. I'm not a skier. Never been good. Winters, I'll be honest with you. From a faith perspective, I've started working in a temple and during the winter, I volunteer a lot more there, work 3 times a week or couple, and I love it. Just love it. Not the way I thought I would either. I didn't think I'd hate it, but I didn't think I'd really enjoy it the way I do.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you
Well,
for being
yeah,
here.
let's give you a round of applause.
Thank you.